HOA Karen calls 911 'cause I had too many guests at my birthday party. It started as a simple birthday celebration. Just a few friends, some food, and a backyard filled with laughter. I had planned the whole thing weeks in advance, sent out invites, and even made sure to keep everything respectful. No loud music past a certain hour, no cars blocking the street, just a relaxed evening with people I cared about. But I forgot one crucial detail. Karen lived next door. The first sign of trouble came before the party even started. As I was setting up, stringing some lights around the patio, I caught a glimpse of Karen peering out from her window, her lips pursed into a tight frown. She had that unmistakable look of someone searching for a reason to be offended. I tried to ignore it, but the moment I stepped back inside, my phone dinged. It was an email from the HOA. Please be advised that all neighborhood gatherings must adhere to community guidelines. Large-scale parties must be approved in advance. I laughed. Large-scale party? I had about 20 people coming, most of whom lived in the neighborhood. This wasn't some kind of festival. I wasn't hosting Coachella in my backyard. But I knew exactly who was behind that email. Karen had struck before the first guest had even arrived. By the time people started trickling in, I noticed Karen's blinds twitching every few minutes. She was watching, monitoring, counting. She wanted something, anything, to complain about. I figured she'd eventually get bored and move on, but as the night went on, she only seemed to be getting more agitated. Then, right in the middle of dinner, she made her move. A loud knock sounded at the front door, sharp and deliberate. I sighed, already knowing who it was. When I opened the door, there she stood, arms crossed, her expression twisted into a look of forced politeness. "Evening," she said, her tone falsely sweet. "I couldn't help but notice the unusually high level of foot traffic coming in and out of your house tonight." I leaned against the door frame. "It's my birthday, Karen." She gave a tight-lipped smile. "I see that. But I also see that there are more guests than what would typically be considered an acceptable gathering size for our community." I blinked. "Acceptable gathering size? Karen, I have 20 people here." She sighed as if I was personally exhausting her. "We have rules in place for a reason. Unapproved large gatherings can lead to excessive noise, parking violations, and disruption of neighborhood harmony. I assume you received the email from the HOA?" I crossed my arms. "Yeah, I got it, and I also checked the actual guidelines. Nowhere does it say I need permission to have friends over for dinner." Kara's eye twitched. She clearly wasn't expecting me to push back. "I just think it would be best for everyone if you started winding things down." I stared at her, then looked over my shoulder at the completely normal gathering in my backyard. People were eating, talking, laughing, hardly the wild rave she was making it out to be. I turned back to her. "No." Her face turned red. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated. "This is my house. It's my birthday. My guests are being respectful. I'm not shutting down my own party because you think you're the neighborhood sheriff." Karen sputtered for a moment before pressing her lips together into a thin line. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you, huh?" With that, she turned on her heel and marched back to her house, slamming the door behind her. I figured that was the end of it. Karen throwing a tantrum because she couldn't boss someone around. But I should have known better. Karen doesn't just lose. Karen escalates. 15 minutes later, the first sign of trouble appeared. A neighbor came inside, looking mildly concerned. "Hey, just a heads up. Karen's out front taking pictures of everyone's cars." I groaned. "You're joking." "You're joking?" She pursed her lips. "Nope, she's got her phone out, pacing up and down the street like a traffic cop." I peeked outside, and sure enough, there she was, snapping photos of license plates like she was compiling a case file for the FBI. I shook my head, deciding to ignore her. If she wanted to waste her evening, that was on her. But the real problem came about 20 minutes later, when I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens. I turned to my friends, No way. I rushed to the front door just in time to see two squad cars pull up to my house, and standing at the curb, looking positively smug, was Karen. I took a deep breath, mentally preparing for the most ridiculous conversation of my life. As the officers stepped out of their vehicles, one of them gave me an apologetic smile. "Evening. We got a call about an alleged disturbance, large gathering, potential noise complaint." I rubbed my temples. "Let me guess." The officer chuckled. "She wouldn't give us her name, but yeah, we figured." I sighed. "Well, you're welcome to take a look, but this is literally just a birthday dinner. No one's being loud and there's no issue here." The officer nodded, glancing past me into the backyard, where the absolute tame normalcy of the party was on full display. A few guests waved. The other officer let out a quiet laugh. "This is the emergency?" Karen, still standing at the curb, huffed. "This is exactly the type of gathering that leads to chaos. It starts with birthday parties and ends with street-wide drunken debauchery." The officer turned back to me, shaking his head slightly. "All right, sir. Just doing our due diligence. Looks like everything's fine. Have a good night." As they walked back to their cars, Karen fumed. "So you're just going to let him violate community rules?" The officer sighed. "Ma'am, it's his house. There's no violation." I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching Karen's world implode in real time. But something told me this wasn't over. Karen had already wasted police resources once. What was stopping her from going even further? Karen didn't take the officer's dismissal well. If anything, it only fueled her sense of injustice. As the squad cars pulled away, she stood there, shaking her head, arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was holding herself together through sheer rage. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, plotting her next move. I had embarrassed her. Worse, I had defied her. And Karen wasn't the type to let something like that go. I went back inside, shaking off the ridiculousness of the situation, but the night was far from over. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Dude, Karen just went to your backyard." I nearly dropped my drink. What? I rushed to the sliding glass door, my heart hammering, and sure enough, there she was, standing just inside my property line, taking pictures of my guests. The audacity, the sheer insanity. I threw the door open. "Karen, what the hell are you doing?" She didn't even flinch. "Gathering evidence," she said, as if she was conducting an official investigation. "If law enforcement won't do their job, I'll do it for them." I stepped forward, forcing myself to stay calm. "You are trespassing." She scoffed. "I'm standing on common ground." "No, you're not," I snapped. "This is my yard. If you don't leave right now, I will call the police and tell them you're trespassing." She narrowed her eyes at me. "You wouldn't dare." I pulled out my phone. "Oh, I absolutely would." That finally did it. With one last glare, she turned and marched off, mumbling something about lawless degenerates. My guests stood there in stunned silence. Someone whispered, "Is she okay?" "Not even a little," I muttered. But I had no time to process what had just happened, because before I could sit down, she struck again. A sudden blast of water sprayed across the yard, hitting the patio chairs, the food table, and a few unlucky guests. Screams of shock rang out as people scrambled to move out of the way. I spun around, eyes wide, trying to figure out where it had come from. Then I saw it. Karen, standing at the edge of her yard, holding a garden hose over the fence, soaking everything in reach. "Karen, are you insane?" I shouted, but she didn't stop. "This is my right," she screeched. "Your party is disruptive, and I am enforcing community standards." People were gasping, some laughing in disbelief. Mark, still holding a now drenched burger, wiped water from his face. "Lady, you are literally attacking people with a hose." "I am restoring order," Karen shrieked, and turned the hose toward the speaker playing soft music. I lunged forward just in time to yank the plug before she could short. Then, as if the universe itself had enough of her nonsense, her hose backfired. There was a loud pop from the spigot, followed by a sudden drop in pressure. Then, with perfect comedic timing, the hose came loose from the faucet and sprayed Karen directly in the face. The yard fell into stunned silence. Karen stood there, completely drenched, blinking rapidly as water dripped from her hair. For one glorious moment, nobody moved. Then Mark let out a single wheezing laugh. That was all it took. The entire party erupted. Karen let out a strangled scream, dropped the hose, and stormed back inside. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. Well, that just happened. One of my guests shook his head. Bro, your neighbor is next level. I sighed, and I have a feeling she's not done yet. I was right. Karen had just embarrassed herself in front of the entire neighborhood. And when people like her feel humiliated, they double down. I had no idea that her next move would be her most outrageous yet. Karen had embarrassed herself in front of the entire neighborhood, but if I thought that would make her back down, I was sorely mistaken. If anything, it only made her more determined. The next morning, just as I was cleaning up from the party, I heard a loud bang on my front door. Not a polite knock, not a doorbell ring, a full-fledged, "I'm about to interrogate you" pound. I sighed, already knowing who it was. I opened the door, and there stood Karen, now dressed in what I could only describe as a fake authority uniform, a navy blazer, a clipboard in hand, and, dear God, a name tag that just said Community Standards Officer. She had made herself a badge. "This has gone far enough," she declared, stepping onto my porch like she had legal jurisdiction. "Your repeated violations of community guidelines require immediate action." I stared at her. "Karen, that's a Halloween costume, not a real title." She ignored me, flipping through her clipboard dramatically. "I am issuing an official citation for noise disturbances, unauthorized gatherings, and multiple infractions against HOA policy." She tore a paper from the clipboard and slapped it against my chest. I took a deep breath and read the citation. It was handwritten, and at the bottom, instead of an actual legal signature, she had signed it as Karen, Neighborhood Enforcer. I couldn't hold it in. I laughed, hard. Karen's face turned red. "You think this is funny?" I don't just think it's funny," I wheezed. "I think it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen." Karen huffed. "Laugh all you want, but I have already reported you to the real authorities." That caught my attention. "Excuse me?" She crossed her arms. "That's right. Since the local police refuse to take this seriously, I have escalated the matter. Your reckless disregard for community harmony is now being handled by the county authorities." I stared at her, trying to decide if she was bluffing. Then, as if on cue, a city inspection truck pulled up. Oh, my God. Two inspectors stepped out, looking confused but professional. One of them checked a clipboard while the other surveyed my house. The lead inspector approached me. "Sir, we received an anonymous report about potential code violations on this property." I looked at Karen. She looked smug. I turned back to the inspector. "And what, exactly, was reported?" He glanced at his clipboard. "Excessive foot traffic, noise pollution, and possible structural violations due to..." He paused, looking confused. "Dangerous decorative lighting?" I blinked. "Dangerous what?" Karen cut in. "That's correct. His decorations are not in line with the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood." The inspector sighed, clearly done with her already. "Ma'am, this is not a safety violation, and unless this house is an actual construction hazard, we have no reason to issue any citations." Karen's jaw clenched. But it is a hazard. He's making a mockery of community guidelines." The inspector turned back to me, fighting to suppress a laugh. "Sir, sorry for the trouble. We'll close this complaint." Karen lost it. "You are all incompetent," she shrieked. "I will take this to the mayor if I have to." The inspector simply nodded. "Good luck with that, ma'am." As the city truck drove away, Karen stomped back to her house, fuming. But I had a feeling she wasn't done yet. She had escalated to local authorities. What was next? The governor? The White House? At this point, there was no telling how far she'd go. I thought the city inspector shutting her down would be the final straw, but Karen's desperation knew no limits. She had lost every battle so far, but she wasn't ready to lose the war. The next morning, I found yet another official-looking document taped to my door. This time, it wasn't a fake citation. I stared at the papers, baffled beyond belief. Karen had actually gone through the trouble of filing a small claims case against me for damages to the community? Damages, I muttered, flipping through the paperwork. The complaint listed emotional distress caused by unauthorized social gatherings, property value depreciation due to disruptive activity, and personal safety concerns related to excessive noise. I almost laughed. This woman had officially lost it. Before I could even process the absurdity of it all, I heard Karen's voice from across the street. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching me like she had already won. "You brought this on yourself," she called. "You could have just followed the rules." I held up the papers. "You're suing me for having a birthday party?" She didn't blink. "I am holding you accountable for your actions." I sighed, shaking my head. "Karen, this is insane." "No," she snapped. "What's insane is your blatant disrespect for the standards of this community." I didn't bother arguing. There was only one thing left to do. I lawyered up. 2 weeks later, we found ourselves in a real courtroom. A judge sat at the front, looking as exasperated as I felt. Karen sat at her table, flanked by an overstuffed binder filled with evidence, which I was sure included blurry photos of my guests eating chips. I, on the other hand, had a real attorney who looked equally amused and annoyed to be dealing with this nonsense. Karen launched into her argument with the passion of someone delivering a TED Talk on neighborhood superiority. She claimed my party had caused irreparable emotional turmoil and that the excessive gathering had led to unbearable distress. The judge listened, then turned to me. "Sir, do you have a response?" I nodded. "Your Honor, not only was my gathering entirely lawful, but I have multiple witnesses, including law enforcement officers, who can confirm that no disturbance took place. Furthermore, the plaintiff's allegations of property value depreciation have zero factual basis." My lawyer stood up. "We'd also like to submit video evidence of Miss Karen trespassing onto my client's property, harassing guests, and—" He paused for dramatic effect. "Attacking the party with a garden hose." Karen's face turned bright red. The judge raised an eyebrow. "A hose?" I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. And, if I may add, she also attempted to issue a handwritten citation under the title of Community Standards Officer." The judge sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of his nose like he was rethinking his life choices. Finally, he looked at Karen. "Ms. Karen, I see no legal basis for your claim. This lawsuit is dismissed." Karen gasped, "But—" "Dismissed." She stormed out of the courtroom, seething. I had won. The best part? The judge ordered Karen to pay for my legal fees. When I got home that evening, I turned on my porch light and took a deep, satisfied breath. Karen's reign of terror was finally over. I knew she'd probably still find ways to be a nuisance, but she had lost big time. A few days later, Mark walked over, grinning. "So? Same time next year?" I laughed. "Absolutely." And just to be petty, I sent Karen an official invitation.